We have some big revelations about Marine Admiral Fujitora, as well as fellow Admiral Green Bull. We also now know the answer to the question of who fed Luffy the delicious foods on Egghead Island. We've also been given a glimpse of Dark Timeline Jinbei and a rather surprising piece of intrigue surrounding the clothing of the 5 Elder Stars. All of which comes to us from the SBS of Volume 110, translated by the Library of Ohara and Pewpiece on Twitter. These are the extra question and answer segments that get included in the volume releases. And for the past few years, they've included some bizarrely relevant information, such as this question about our 2 most recent Marine Admirals. Odachi Gachu. Please tell us the former occupations of Fujitora and Ryukugyu before they became Marine Admirals. Oda. Alright. Just as they became the ones in charge for the defense of the affiliated nations of the world government, through a system called the World Military Draft, these 2 were handpicked by the Marines. And before we get into their more detailed histories, Oda has provided us with the drawings of Green Bull and Fujitora when they were children, so I guess more accurately drawings of Aramaki and Isho, and they are just amazing. It's a bit trippy though, because if you didn't tell me that this was Fujitora, then I don't think that I would have guessed that. It's all about the eyes. You don't quite realize how important eyes are to a character design until you get rid of them, but Fujitora appears to have grown up with a very Japanese aesthetic, which he has carried over into adulthood, and it makes me wonder if his birthplace was another Wano colony, like Shimotsuki Village in East Blue, because this child looks like he would be very at home on Wano. But whatever the case, Oda continues to detail his past as follows. After losing his money at a gambling house in West Blue's Twin Snakes Island, Isho was made to work as a bodyguard, where he was bought by the government for a large sum of money. And a long time ago, when Isho was still in the Grand Line, he was formerly the head of guards of a country that once existed known as the Aoi Kingdom, or Blue Kingdom. And he was known as a major war criminal when the Aoi Kingdom was eradicated in a war, a fact that the government is aware of. So that last part is very important, because there is an alternate translation floating around that makes it sound like the world government isn't aware of Fujitora's war criminal status, but they definitely are, and there's a couple of things to flag here. The first is that the language is a bit vague, but it would appear that Fujitora was sold to the Marines. And this is not the first time we've heard of this sort of thing happening. That was Mother Carmel's whole business with the orphanage on Elbaf, and she actually sold John Giant to the Marines, as well as assumedly most of the Giant squad. And who knows how many others, because this was not a one-time deal. This was her business for decades and decades. And I do want to linger on the war criminal stuff for a bit, because this could be a Bartholomew Kuma situation where he was branded an awful tyrant and had all of these horrible acts slandered onto his wonderful name. Or Fujitora may have actually earned the war criminal title, and it may turn out that the things he saw that caused him to blind himself may also be things that he himself performed. Because Fujitora's design is based on Shintaro Katsu's portrayal of Zatoichi, and that character had a fairly dark past as well, having killed a lot of people, which is something that he eventually came to regret, and so he began to reform his ways. So Fujitora might not be quite as clean as one suspected. And I guess at the moment I'm leaning more towards the idea that he did do some bad things. And as for Mr. Green Bull Man, Oda's already gone through a bit of his past, but he expands on it here. First by granting us another adorable drawing of a rough and tough child drunkard, very similar to how Oda drew Child Kuzan. But he goes on to tell us that Aramaki was a police officer in the South Blues Taya Kingdom, and after a major incident involving a woman, he was imprisoned by his country. His reputation for his extraordinary strength reached the ears of the government, so he joined the Marines, promoted as an admiral. So this looks to be a case where we rip someone straight out of jail and put him in the admiral spot. That is wild. And this backstory does seem to be a reference to Green Bull's design inspiration, which is Yoshio Harada's portrayal of a character named Aramaki in the film Ronin Gai. And fun fact, Shintaro Katsu, Fujitora's inspiration, is also in this film, as well as a bouncer named Bull, and that's probably why Oda gave Fujitora that bouncer backstory, as a reference to this film, because it was also Shintaro Katsu's last film before he passed away. And it may also be why Fujitora and Green Bull get along so well together despite their seemingly complete opposite ends of the justice spectrum, because in Ronin Gai they originally get into a fight, but instead decide to celebrate their mutual misery together. But in any case, what happens is that these 2 disgraced samurai end up protecting a group of local prostitutes from a militia determined to kill them all, and one prostitute in particular that Aramaki is in love with. So that probably gives us a pretty decent idea of Green Bull's past. He was in love with a woman and probably slaughtered a lot of people to try and protect her. I say try because in the movie it doesn't end well. And interestingly, Shintaro Katsu's character Bull ends up selling himself to protect the prostitutes, and given that Oda's version of Aramaki has taken on the Bull naming, that could be the sort of deal that he found himself accepting in the global draft. And this may even speak to the future of Fujitora as well, because Bull's final act in this film is to betray betray the master that he sold himself to with a good old stabbing, which I think we know is the general direction that Fujitora is leaning in. It's really just a matter of when, and more importantly, who gets the stabbing. Switching focus now, we have an uncharacteristically important question that gets answered in this SBS. In chapter 1103, Luffy was so hungry and couldn't move, but in chapter 1106, he became full. Who was it that gave Luffy food? So at first I thought that this was going to be a joke answer, because this question seems so purposely left open for some sort of reveal later down the line, but no, Oda gives us the answer right here. In chapter 1103, Luffy starts eating a bunch of food, but who answered his plea after he screamed out food? Close to him was Sanji and Frankie. Could it have been one of them? Though the likes of Kizaru and Sentomaru were also there. No one noticed it happening, meaning for no one to have spotted it, it must have been carried out at the speed of light. I sure don't know who that could be. Speed of light. So he doesn't outright say it, but crazily enough, it is heavily implied that Kizaru is the one who gave Luffy the food. And I'm not quite sure how to feel about this, because it's a bit inconsistent with Kizaru's powers, because yeah, he's fast, but his movements are always so bright and obvious, because to turn into light, he needs to make things super bright, and that makes people go, what's that happening over there? So I don't buy that absolutely no one standing there, especially Saint Saturn, just wouldn't have noticed. And this is one of those times where the SBS does kind of annoy me, because these sections are starting to feel a bit like they exist to cover holes that Oda, for whatever reason, didn't want to or couldn't be bothered to fill in the actual story, which is a bit meh because there are millions of One Piece fans who are never going to watch this video or read the Volume SBS segment, so they'll just never know the answer to this question. Through no fault of their own, mind you, they read everything it is that they were supposed to, but lately Eiichiro Oda has developed a bit of a bad habit of asking questions in the manga, but not feeling the need to answer those questions in the manga. With all of that said though, this is extremely good news for all of us, because against all odds, we get to tick off another square in our 2024 Bing card, because Kizaru has officially been redeemed. Obviously not all the way, but our criteria for redemption was just an action that assists the crew. So feeding Luffy and ensuring that both he and Bonnie escape the island is a pretty big thing. And we are now threatening a row 1 Bing if we can discover who the man with the burn scar is before the year ends. I think that's a pretty big ask though. This next question, however, not so much. Oda Sensei, about Yamato who ate a devil fruit because of hunger. What did child Yamato's beast form and human beast form look like? And Oda then obliges by showing us the most adorable drawings he's ever made. It almost feels like what would happen if Chopper ate Yamato's devil fruit. And it makes me want to see a whole series of child Zoan users like a teeny tiny Phoenix Marco in a cage or something, or a whole spin-off, something like Dragon Ball Daima for One Piece characters. Or, much more better, a Pokemon style game where you can capture all of these mini Zoan users. Next question. The suits that the 5 elders are always wearing, are they high brand designer clothes? Is there a shop in Marijois that specifically caters to them? Please tell us about the clothing designer as well. Oda. His name is Nyon Yamani, a designer clothes specialist who hails from the Nagagutsu Kingdom, which means Longboot Kingdom, in East Blue. Only the 5 elders are allowed to wear his special clothes. And what I love most about this is that Nyonyo himself isn't even clothed in this drawing, because he's not allowed to wear his own clothes. But also his slogan is said that being naked is the true peak of fashion. So Nyonyo Yamani is clearly a play on Giorgio Armani, and it looks like he's a mink, but not just any mink, because he looks crazily similar to Moji. I mean, yeah, the ear shape is different, but given that they're both from East Blue, I don't know, I think there might be a decent chance that they're related, which really recontextualizes the whole Orange Town arc. To know that Luffy smacked the crap out of a guy related to another guy who makes suits for the 5 elder guys. But also it might not necessarily be that close of a relation. What this could be is a whole niche race of semi-minks, because we also have Merry from East Blue who doesn't share the cat qualities, but his sheep features do occupy the same space as Nyonyo and Moji's, and all 3 of them are from East Blue. Although I guess the most exciting news is that Nyonyo finally has a new customer for the first time in like 200 years, because Figaland Garling is now allowed to wear his outfits. In fact, Garling may very well have sneakily pre-ordered an outfit, because he rocked up dripping all over the place like a leaky tap. The really fun thing about this question is that initially you think that the Nagagutsu, the Longboot Kingdom, is an on-the-spot comedy answer. But no, this goes back to lore. This kingdom has actually been mentioned in One Piece before. This was during the Reverie when we met the king of the Longboot Kingdom, Furari, who looks like this, and this. You wouldn't know just by looking at them, but all three of these pictures are of the same character, and Toei just can't seem to get their act together with a design or a color scheme. Doesn't matter though, because all three of these Furaris were trying to organize a marriage between Shirahoshi and his son Tributu. And along with Nyonyo Nyamani, I guess this confirms that the Longboot Kingdom is the One Piece equivalent of Italy. Hence why it's called the Longboot Kingdom, because that's what Italy is a big old boot. But then we have something that I've been waiting to see for quite some time, which are the good and dark timeline variants of Jinbei. Starting with the good, and because Jinbei has a bit of a head start in age over most of the crew, we see him at ages 60 and 80. At age 60, he's saying, that's enough, don't go after them, we're all equals, which is very nice. It implies that a mere 20 years into the future, the One Piece world has more or less solved racism. Good on them. And then at age 80, Jinbei is saying, you've grown so much. And I can't help but wonder who he's saying that to. My first thought is Shirahoshi, because she's the youngest Jinbei relevant person that we know of, but we're talking 40 years down the line at this stage, and Shirahoshi would be 55, well into middle age. So I wonder if he might be talking to the children of characters we know of, or even grandchildren. But then we get to what I always enjoy much more, which is the dark timeline version, an alternate reality where something goes very wrong in One Piece and crushes the dreams and the will of all of the Straw Hats. So what we see is a very angry age 60 Jinbei claiming that he will, quote, kill all humans, which is pretty extreme. And I imagine that for something like this to have happened, he would have needed to be betrayed by Luffy himself, which isn't out of the question because Dark Time Luffy is quite the prick to say the least. But at age 80, Jinbei has gone full Hody Jones and is yelling that he will drag somebody down to the sea floor. And what I like about this is that you can see water bubbles around Jinbei, which is very sad because it means that he's now made a full retreat back to living in the water. But also because clearly the dawn of the world never happened and the fishermen never got to live on the surface under the sun. And you can even see the good and bad timeline differences in clothing colors. The good timeline Jinbei is dressed in very bright, hopeful attire, whilst bad timeline Jinbei has embraced his inner darkness on the outside. But now, a very important question. The Long Arm tribe has two elbows in one arm, right? Do each of those elbows have their own term? So at first I was a bit confused by this question, but it actually makes perfect sense. If we had two elbows, then we would need some sort of term to differentiate between like the upper and the lower elbow. I mean, those terms would likely be upper and lower elbow, but not in One Piece. No, as Eiichiro Oda gives us the following answer. Wow, this is a wonderful question. I'm moved. Yes, of course they have their own terms. The elbow closer to the hand is called the friend elbow, and the elbow that's close to the shoulder is called the love elbow. This seems to represent the emotional distance between you and your significant other. I mean, it's so stupid, but it makes so much sense. We're friends, alright, you stand this elbow apart, but on the other hand, oh, we're lovers, well, guess what, honey? You can come all the way up to this elbow. And it even works in English because we have the phrase to keep one at arm's length, and in this case, it would be the same, but just specifically for elbows. And at this stage, a reader has a surprise for Eiichiro Oda, because a certain person with a frankly envious amount of time on their hands has gone through the vast majority of the SBS segments and has made a list of words that Oda uses most to answer questions. And I will now present to you Oda's top 3 most used words. Coming in at number 3, it is poop, which he has used on 13 occasions. In second place, we have boobs, which come up on 19 occasions, although I'd like it noted that this almost certainly doesn't include any time that Oda has talked about breast-related topics without specifically mentioning the word boobs, like all of the times he's given measurements for characters and such, because I guarantee you it is much more than 19. But finally, we have number 1, and this word, this very special word, should come as no surprise to anyone. But Oda's most used word to answer the SBS segments is penis, as well as penis synonyms, which have been used 36 times. A lot of these we use to answer devil fruit related questions about what happens to the penises of those with fruit powers. And the answer is always exactly the same. The penis also gets the fruit powers, but people won't stop asking. This fan base has an intense penile curiosity. But now we have a genuinely important question. Hello, Oda-sensei. In chapter 1045 of volume 103, Luffy used a technique called Gomu Gomu no Gigant. But how did his clothes and even his sandals get gigantic as well? Please tell us. Again, this is genuinely important, because Luffy's clothes do change when he enters Gear 5th, except for when they don't, when they sort of do, like what we're seeing on Elbaf right now, with Gear 5th Luffy electing to keep parts of his Viking attire, but his clothes do change again once he becomes a giant. So let's see what Eiichiro Oda has to say about this. And what he says is that Luffy's clothes change when he becomes becomes a giant because otherwise his giant penis would fall out. That's legitimately his answer, and that now makes 37 times that Oda has specifically mentioned a penis in the SBS segments.